making their way in. I am here with Claudia Knowlton-Chaik, who I am going to introduce you to in just a moment. And she's such a good friend of mine. I think maybe what I'll do is just start on with a story of how we met. So Claudia, I was moderating a woman in procurement, I think, or a woman in supply chain panel over at ISM, not last February, but the February before in Houston, Texas. And Claudia showed up in her cowboy boots, as she does. And I thought, you know what? That is somebody that I definitely want to meet. And so, fast forward a couple of hours later, Claudia came up to me and she was like, I've got these tickets to the Houston Rodeo and Luke Bryant. Will you come with me? And I was like, yeah, I will. And so I ended up spending the rest of my evening at the Houston Rodeo, which is amazing. It's got like 21,000 volunteers or something like that, Claudia.
Yep.
Yeah. And we watched Luke Bryant and we had a great time. And that's kind of where our friendship blossomed. And I'm sure glad that it did. So let's get started. Let's not delay anymore because we have a lot to talk about. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon keynote, Supply Chain Risk, with myself, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, as well as CEO of Ships, alongside my fabulous friend and amazing supply chain leader, Claudia Knowlton-Chaik, who is the Senior Director of Global Logistics at Google. So welcome, Claudia. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me, and Michael. It's great to be part of this.
Yeah, so Claudia is a leader that inspires me every day, and truly someone that will give us a fresh perspective on some of the biggest risks in supply chain today. So why don't you give us a little bit of a quick introduction as to, what you're doing, what your journeys look like, and maybe, what global logistics looks like at Google.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you again. And that's what makes these events so important is the relationships that you build at these. And I know that there's many members out in Slack building those relationships. So good for you. Good for making time to be a curious learner and continue to learn from others at these events. And thank you, Michael and Sarah, for making it possible. So a little bit about me. I've got a 36-year journey. I started as an engineer at IBM, had 4 kids within 5 years, and there was a lot of jokes that they would never put me in planning, but I did spend some time in planning. So I started my heritage at IBM in the engineering world and then transferred over to supply chain, and I never looked back. Love supply chain, love the wind in my hair every single day. There's always an opportunity and a challenge. And so I'm really grateful. So I've worked at IBM, GE Healthcare, medical devices, Motorola, did some stints in the chemical industry, running the entire supply chain, but really felt that I wanted to get back to high tech. So came back to Facebook and now with Google. Super, super excited to be at Google. It's a very big role to lead global logistics at Google. We really, at the end of the day, it's all about having the right part at the right place at the right time to support all of our data centers. So oftentimes people ask me, well, who do you serve at Google? Well, ultimately serving the end user, which is all of you folks who are using Google Search or YouTube or whatever Google product that you're using. But our job is to make sure that the data centers are always up and running. We make sure that the equipment is getting into the data center floors. We're turning up new data centers. So there's a lot there: trade compliance, warehousing, transportation, all of the initiatives. And we've got a huge automation project going on where we're deploying transportation management system, warehouse management system, global trade management, robotics, material handling. So it's, I feel the wind in my hair every single day. And so it's an awesome time. Now, besides being a Googler, I am also a mother of 4 that I just spoke about, and I'm a grandmother of 9. So life is full. Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, on top of COVID and everything that's coming at you as a supply chain leader, you've also got all of those projects that you just spoke about, and you juggle it with grace. Let me just tell you. So anyways, this fireside chat is going to be a little bit different. Claudia and I wanted to do it a little bit differently. So, what we're going to do is we're going to address the various supply chain business units where we see the most risks. We're going to talk about what those risks actually are. And then we're going to talk about either lessons learned or how to prepare so that you're leaving this discussion with tangible takeaways and things that you can really take and implement into your business, supply chains, into your everyday. So, how about we just get started? So, the first business unit that we're going to talk about is really supply chain disruption. And man, I think we're opening up a can of worms right at the beginning because talk about disruption. I mean, the amount of disruption that we've seen over even the last 12 months has been crazy. So I'm going to turn it over to Claudia. Let's talk about some of the risks associated to supply chain disruption, and then we'll get into lessons learned.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so there's many, many different kinds of disruptions, and many of us who have spent, 30 plus years in the supply chain have lived through many of those. But, there's natural disasters, there's capacity constraints, there's terrorist attacks. We lived through 9/11 and others. Supplier failures, there's labor actions, strikes, and in some countries, labor actions are pretty regular. We've got civil unrest even here in the US, clearance delays. We've seen the ports close at times, volatility in oil prices. And we're pretty grateful right now that we're not faced with that volatility right now, which is great because we have other issues around capacity constraints. And then the pandemics, which as much as you prepare, you're never fully prepared for, something like COVID. And so there's lessons learned. But when you think about the consequences of these disruptions, first of all, it hits at the family, it hits at life, deaths of people. So there's an emotional element to a lot of these disruptions, even beyond the supply chain. There's a financial impact. Some of these businesses are really hurting right now. There's ongoing business viability. Some of these businesses won't make it, which is really tough. And then there's the brand image and the reputation, how your business is reacting and recovering through these kind of things. And then there's the competitive advantage. So there's some companies that are going to build competitive advantage through disruptions and use that to help their businesses. And in some cases, you get a little early warning. So like with hurricanes, I mean, typically the weather, you can see, something's coming and get ready for it. You never know how bad it's going to be. Or, you get an inkling of, so in some cases, you're going to get that early warning signal. In some cases, you don't get that early warning signal. So, also some of the events are short-lived, but then some are long-lasting. So in the case like COVID-19, this event itself is really dragging out and it continues to evolve. So, we've got the resurgence happening, who knows if there's going to be another resurgence that happens, but, it's like, how do we address it? How do we evolve with it? How do we get through it and still serve our customers? So, this year has really tested supply chains in every single kind of industry. With numerous disruptions, we've had COVID-19, we've had capacity constraints, we've had the civil unrest, and, fortunately, we haven't been dealing with oil prices going sky high like we did back in 2010. So the lesson learned are many, many, many lessons learned, but the preparation is key. So being ready for the next crisis by building resilience into the organization. When I talk about resilience, I mean, kind of like the time to survive and the time to recover. And it encompasses the organization, the processes, the technology, being able to look around the corners at, what's going to be coming next. So for example, we're in COVID-19, we've got civil unrest, we've got capacity constraints. Well, what if there's fires out in California? What if the power, has to be shut down at certain times? You got to think about all of these different things, because it's enough, like what we're going through right now, but there could be more. So it's being prepared for the unknown, and really driving operational rigor every single day in your business, not just during a crisis. So it's one thing to come together and have war rooms and and really drive the crisis of the moment, but having that operational rigor, knowing the details day in and day out of your business is really, really important. And then, do you have the data to sense, to understand, and make decisions? So we all know how important data is.
Yeah.
So we're not out of the woods yet on COVID-19, and we're preparing for, what if something else happens on top of all of this? And so we'll be ready for that. But having effective BCPs, business continuity plans, that are pressure tested in advance. Like, you don't want to be pressure testing them while you're going through the scenario. Some positives that we saw coming through during our time in COVID-19 is that we really had great partners in our 3PLs, our third-party logistics provider, for our warehouses, for our transportation and our brokerage, and our suppliers as well for our commodities. This makes a huge difference in how you get through this. We think of our 3PLs as an extension of ourselves. And boy, they came through for us big time. And then it's, remembering that the BCPs may work for the crisis you've seen in the past, but you've got to be nimble enough to understand where they may break. And
we lost Claudia for a second. We have had a few technical difficulties with Claudia just for the minute. So we're just going to give her a minute to come back in. But holy nuggets. I mean, I didn't even,
you still hear me?
Oh, there we go. You're back. Yep.
Okay. All right. So
we don't have your video though, Claudia.
Okay. Sorry, folks.
There we go. No problem.
It's that virtual world that we live in. So building on BCPs includes, the resilience and the diversity.
It's okay. Keep going.
Okay.
All good.
And that comes into the geographic redundancy, minimizing sole and single sourcing, and BCPs have historically been focused on solving for one or two specific geographies or companies, whether it's a natural disaster or a trade embargo. But COVID has challenged us to design BCPs that address global challenges. So that is something that we continue to work on. Then taking care of our people is job one. Ensuring the safety and compliance, taking all the precautions for their well-being. And it's not just about our company's well-being, but also our 3PLs, our transportation and warehouse partners, making sure that we've implemented all of the right protocols to keep people safe. So you can't over-prepare for disruptions. This has given us the opportunity to shift our broader economic model and business continuity planning to balance our business and people's well-being. So despite it all, we've delivered for our customers, no matter the circumstances. The customer is the driving force behind everything that we do. And that takes technology, visibility, supply chain security. Those are some of the key differentiators for us. And that technology and visibility can't be understated in times of disruption.
Absolutely. And I like the point about the emotion, right? I think that is definitely something that we need to take into account as far as risk when it comes to our people within our supply chains. You and I talk about this a lot. We talk about mental health and what that means for the employees, and really empathizing and understanding what they're going through. And I think that was a really good point, because we don't we don't really talk about the emotional side of what everybody is going through when it comes to a disruption. Everybody's just sort of moving and grooving and working 12 to 14-hour days to keep that going, and it takes a toll, and it's definitely a risk on the system.
Yeah.
So you did cover transportation, you covered suppliers and globalization. Maybe we can talk about government related uncertainties. I know the USMCA is coming up pretty quickly. We're still kind of talking about COVID, we're still talking about what's happening right now, but that's coming up really quickly. So what are the risks with us moving into USMCA, and how do we prepare for that?
Well, I think the key thing for, NAFTA ending and USMCA beginning on July 1st, which is the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. So in the event that you're managing a product that is manufactured or assembled in either Mexico or Canada, and you're planning to take advantage of the preferential.
Oh, we lost her again. She'll be back. Claudia? All right. So we're just going to let her.
Countries. So you
Oh,
need.
there you are. We lost you for a second.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
So you need a team that is global from a trade compliance perspective, that's really looking at all of the local regulations. So we have a team in trade compliance that's in my group that sits in all of these various countries, that keeps up on the local legislation. So we call it globalization and
Glocalization. That's the second time that we've heard that term. I think Peter Hall used that this morning, right, Larry? Larry's going to let me know because he was there when that happened. I wonder if maybe we should change over to her hotspot, Mike.
Okay.
Oh.
You want me to change over?
Well, we just lost you again just for a minute. So I think you're fine right now. Let's keep going.
Okay. All right. So really having those local teams and region matters, so that we can get both an accurate status of the situation, as well as manage relationships with the local authorities. And then there's the civil unrest, there's protest.
Okay. So Claudia, if you can hear me, Ryan, do you want to put up a number there that Claudia can call in by phone?
A different internet.
Oh, Claudia?
Yeah.
I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. Let me, if I could, can I swing back to transportation?
Sure.
Because I think that, I talked about our partners, and, we face capacity constraints, especially out of Asia and into Europe. And we worked with partners that were very creative on helping us get the capacity that we needed. So for example, taking passenger aircraft and turning them into cargo aircraft. And, of course, we had to use some charters as well out of Asia, but really picking a partner that can help you mitigate the disruptions, who has a BCP. We met with our key provider for transportation at it was like mid-February, and they were already giving us industry analysis. Okay, I'm being asked to switch to phone. Should I do that?
Yeah. So you can actually use the arrow and switch, and then we might get a better. Do you see that option? Switch to phone audio when you use the up arrow by mute. Claudia? All right, cool. So as we wait for Claudia to come back in, I know that Larry confirmed that Peter Hall did use glocalization. So this is a new term for me. I don't know if it's a new term for you, but it's definitely being used. And so it's something that we should be taking a better look at, I guess, as far as terms are concerned. And so I really liked what she was saying as far as resiliency. I know that over on LinkedIn, we've got a few people that I want to say hi to, because they are joining us over on the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page. Shneha, Claudia Freed, John Buglino, sorry. And Claudia Freed says, great perspective on resiliency. Abba says, hi. Claudia, are you back?
I'm back.
Awesome. All right, let's keep going. So
Okay.
we were on transportation. Did you want to continue with that one?
Yeah, I just, again, I think it's really important, the partners that you're picking. And even before COVID really started in the US, way before that, we were meeting with our providers, and we were getting an industry update. We were understanding the things that they were going to be doing, to help us mitigate. We even though it was still very small, I mean, there was probably 65,000 cases globally at that time, when we met on the industry analysis and things that they were going to be doing and what we could expect. And they came through for us all the way. And I think as a business, it's really important to conduct your route risk analysis, do vulnerability assessments of your transportation landscape. And then we have a global team that, is really following the sun, if you will. So we have 24/7 capability. And we're evaluating RFPs based on service quality and cost, not just on cost, and risk mitigation. So we're looking at all those as we evaluate. And then really doing deep analysis in any high risk lanes, conducting security training, proactively analyzing new and emerging markets, and then making sure that we have partners that can flex to our needs. And boy, our partners really rose to the occasion during COVID and throughout all of this. So.
And that's, those are some really good points. I mean, we don't talk about it a lot, but I think we need to talk a little bit more about how, we prepare and how we test those plans that we have in place for when disruptions happen. And I think that that's a really good point, because I don't know how much we are doing that as supply chain professionals to really see where we're at and where we need to have improvements, and not at the time of that disruption. So I know we wanted to talk, you touched a little bit on globalization. How should we prepare for that? I mean, Peter talked this morning about how we're going to have localized markets. So globalization won't go away necessarily. And obviously it's going to take us a long time to go through that transition. But when we think about localized markets, so selling into China and having the goods manufactured in China, or selling in the US and manufactured in the US, what do you think about that? How should we prepare for that?
So I would say always keep a close eye on the country of origin of the components that you're looking to source. We find it critical to manage both our IP and the risk also from, trade compliance perspective, and then the geo risk exposure. So, it's always a work in progress. We continue to iterate. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're shifting our suppliers every other day, but really, from a commodity perspective and a supplier perspective, really driving around that country of origin, and then the trade compliance and the geo risk exposure, while also protecting our IP. Nearshoring continues to be a very strong option, one that we do utilize. Conducting due diligence on the marketplace and the suppliers. We have, deep data and intelligence, looking always at the landscape of the marketplace and our suppliers. And then having a really good supplier risk assessment program, around financials, insurance, cybersecurity, BCPs, a plan for when disasters strike. There's so many things that go into that supplier risk assessment program, but those are some of the things that I would highlight. We are a global company. We need to be in all the regions that we serve our customers, and our suppliers are in many of those regions as well.
Absolutely. And then another big one that I know you and I really wanted to talk about was sustainability, right? Everybody's talking about sustainability. I spoke about that in my session with Suchi earlier. Eliminating waste, environmental, all that kind of thing. So, what are the risks around sustainability, about doing the right thing, how to prepare for that? Maybe talk a little bit about what Google is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll talk about both environmental and sustainability here. I think the most important thing is to start with a baseline, conduct a risk assessment, review heat maps, consider your internal and external factors, and that your partners are an extension of your company, and they
Right.
also reflect positively or negatively with your stakeholders, your customers, and your end users. So you start with a baseline, and then you identify opportunities and risks. So we have a team that's focused on sustainability and a team that's focused on risk management. And from a environmental and a sustainability perspective, we set clear expectations for our suppliers through our supplier code of conduct, which covers social and environmental expectations like labor, health and safety, environment, ethics, management systems. And then we require those suppliers to contractually commit to adhere to that supplier code of conduct. And then we assess supplier sustainability risk by, considering the countries where they operate, what we're procuring, and the supplier's past record on any legal violations or fines or allegations. So we then calculate this inherent risk and apply our sustainability performance scores, which tell us the supplier's residual risk. So based on the results of our risk assessment, we then conduct a site assessment, we conduct training, and we engage in other ways to further mitigate risk. Now, if I think about sustainability and logistics, some key areas that we support are packaging, so through density, design, reuse, but we also support sustainability by reducing emissions in our transportation and optimizing our routes and our modes and our service levels. So we have programs called air to ocean, air to ground. Air to nothing is one of my favorites.
What is that? What is that? Tell me what air
That
to
would
nothing is.
be, where you literally take the nodes out of the supply chain and you're able to provide in country, so in country for country kind of capabilities, or you reduce the need for a particular commodity. So there's many different ways you can go from air to nothing. But that's one of my favorites. It is one of the more difficult ones, obviously, to enact. And then, your typical reuse, recycle, and remarket. So we try and do everything we can from keeping things going into the landfill. So when compared to Google's full environmental footprint, transportation and logistics is really quite a small portion. It's about 4 to 6% of the overall footprint. But it's a portion where we can have a strong influence, on air to ocean, air to ground, and those kind of things. While we also increase predictability, as we increase predictability, we can reduce the amount of inventory held throughout the supply chain, which reduces that environmental impact. So we actually are doing a whole network optimization, modeling the network, reducing the nodes, taking transportation into account on how we can reduce the amount of air. And so there's many different things that we do. And of course, in our data centers, there's a huge effort that goes into sustainability around the utilities that we use and making sure that we're using renewable energy and things like that. So lots going on at Google in terms of sustainability and also the environmental factors.
So I have a question from the LinkedIn audience, Claudia Freed. I guess with all the disruption that's going on, and it's a great question because she's asking you, what do you think about disruption and environment/sustainability goals? Do they move to the back of the line, or are they still very much at the forefront of, your goals and what you're doing at Google?
Yeah. So for Google, they're still very much forefront. Again, we've got a full team focused on it, and within the data centers, it's a huge focus because we need power, we need cooling, we need lots of different things in the data centers. But in the supply chain, it never took a back seat to everything else that was going on. We continue to look at the opportunities that we have to keep things out of landfill, to reduce the amount of emissions, to reduce the amount of packaging that we're using. And so all those things continue to be just as important during a crisis as when we're not in a crisis.
And Sneha asks on LinkedIn as well, what are some of the quality metrics that you're using to evaluate?
Quality metrics to evaluate sustainability?
Yeah, I
Or,
think so, because you were talking about, providing your suppliers with your sustainability mandate. And how do you keep on top of that, I guess? What are the metrics that you're using?
yeah, so I can speak to it from logistics, and I know that from a data center perspective, there's many there around how much renewable energy we use, how much energy we use, how much we've reduced year on year. In fact, there's videos out on LinkedIn that you can watch if you're really interested, and you can probably find them on my LinkedIn profile. They are really good that will show you what Google is doing. But so I can talk to the logistics piece. Is we provide input on CO2 emissions and the reduction that we bring year on year and quarter on quarter, and also in the packaging reductions that we bring forward, in materials, in transportation savings, because as you improve your density, you're going to improve how many you can get on a truck, if you will. And then we have another metric around remarketing and reuse, so that we can show of our products. So let's just say we decommission something, or we've got E&O, we'll show how much of that we were able to reuse, recycle, or remarket. So those would be
Awesome.
our key that I'm aware that I actually have input into. And then there's a whole set of metrics around energy from the data center perspective.
Yeah, I can only imagine. There's probably a ton of metrics on different sides of the business units and things like that. So let's talk about supply and demand, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a call to action that we wanted to put out there for supply chain leaders, and then we're going to get into the questions before we round this out. So the food supply chain, obviously, everybody's been talking about that as far as COVID-19 and us all obviously seeing a shift in supply and demand when it comes to not only food products, but also other products that have been on the shelves and then shown that, obviously the consumer demand has gone up for those, and then we've had empty shelves. So what are some of the problems? What are some of the risks with supply and demand, and what have been the response of supply chains, or what do we need to do as supply chain professionals to really prepare for that?
Yeah. Oh, I love talking about this one. So a little over a month ago, I got a call from somebody who reached out to Google and really, wanted to help solution some of the issues that food banks were having. We were reading about how, pigs were being euthanized and milk was being spilt and potatoes were being plowed under because there wasn't the same demand. And so I started to work on this as a side project, and it's been really interesting. So the problem is, as you know, the consumer drives the supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. And so lessons learned is there's been changes in the demand and changes in the supply. So even before COVID, we had a food problem here in the US. And what we know is that through COVID, demand is up at the food banks 40%. So those that were marginalized even before COVID are even further marginalized after, during COVID. So these food banks are squeezed with short supplies. There's reduced volunteers. People don't want to, go in and be perhaps, facing COVID. And there's an increased number of people needing food. So we know that the consumer drives the supply chain. So when restaurants shut down, when cruise ships quit running and schools closed, it drove different demand patterns. So when the food bank spiked with more people in need of food, they couldn't get the supply and also couldn't get the food in the right form to deliver to individuals and families. So what we know is that some food banks have kitchens and they can cut things down and make smaller, but many of the food pantries, so there is a difference between food banks and food pantries, many of the food pantries don't have the ability to break the food down. And then you get into the whole SKU proliferation, how, a supplier might be shipping a SKU versus a food pantry just says, I need, 6 potatoes and a piece of peanut butter or whatever. So there's all kinds of opportunities here. And in the fact that also that people don't have cars to get to a food pantry or to a food bank, so we have to reach the elderly, the disabled, the rural areas continue to be an issue. So we've read all the stories about the ranchers and the farmers not being able to get their goods to the right place because the restaurants are no longer ordering and things like that. So there's lots of good efforts being made, mostly at the regional level, to supply food. And the government has stepped up. So we've seen the USDA let out about 1.2 billion in contracts to companies who would provide boxed food. So from truck to trunk, they put out, all of these bids, and I think they're going to let out another set of bids to companies who could fulfill these boxed food to the food banks and to the food pantries. So USDA has also provided billions to ensure farmers and ranchers continue to produce. But meanwhile, the supply and demand is a little bit wonky. And what we also know is, back to that consumer drives the behavior, we saw consumers hoarding things, which was really interesting. I mean, hoarding toilet paper. And then we saw all the empty shelves, which, is just another way in which the consumer was really driving some interesting behavior. And now we see toilet paper on sale and plenty stocked shelves. So it just took a while for the supply chain to catch up, but it was out of sync with demand for a while, for sure.
So how do we prepare for that for the next time something like this happens?
Well, in my humble opinion, so we need a national supply chain solution. Again, I've talked about, there's a lot of regional efforts, some really great efforts. I think it's having a national supply chain solution while also having technology that links the demand with the supply. So food banks and food pantries being able to enter into a portal that says, I need this, this, and this, and then having the food source, the farmers and the ranchers be able to enter into a portal. Well, I have this and I have this and I have this. So there are some of those technologies already available. There's one called Meal Connect, which is more about food that's going to get wasted. So that's a very short timeline. And then there's Food Source USA, which is also being developed, which is really about pairing up ranchers and farmers and getting paid for those goods, and food banks getting it in the way in which they need it, which means there could be some need for, repackaging, transform, but there's really that underlying issue of the SKU and getting the translation of the SKU into what the food pantry actually needs. So there's a lot of work that we're doing there. And so what I've done is gone out and put together what's called a food supply chain coalition, and it's actually just getting ready to launch. We've got 3 universities on board. We have 27 supply chain university students, 11 faculty members, and an advisory board made up of food executives, logistics executives, supply chain executives. with a focus on really closing the end-to-end gaps in the national farm to food bank supply chain, while also assisting with short-term regional impact. So we'll be looking at it from a regional perspective and a national perspective. But I think that, building resilience into supply chains of all types is critical, and ensuring that the communities have access to the critical infrastructure, including local food supply chain. And I think that's really the key, is getting, again, there's a lot of regional efforts. There's a lot of, USDA is trying to help out. Feeding America is the largest, branch of getting food, nonprofits and addressing the increase in demand. But I think we've really got to look at it from a national level, and, putting supply chain university students to work. And these are going to be paid positions. So we got funded through the All-In Challenge. And
what's it called again? What's the group called again?
The All-In Challenge is
no, your group, the Food Supply Chain.
Food Supply Chain Coalition.
Love it. Okay. Because I think you and I want to do a bit of a call to action to supply chain leaders, right?
Yes. So this is you've heard President Trump and Fauci and Ben Carson and many others, talk about supply chain and how important it is for our nation. And, you think about food as the most basic need that people have. And what fuels me is knowing that there's kids that are going without food, or elderly or somebody. And so, giving these university students the opportunity to go to work. Some of their offers were rescinded, during because of COVID. And they're from 3 of the top-notch universities: Arizona State, University of Tennessee, and UW-Madison, all studying supply chain. Put them to work and get some of this technology, help be the arms and legs that get this technology and really deployed at a national level.
Yeah. And I think for supply chain leaders, I mean, just our knowledge in supply chain, even if you don't have a lot of time to go and volunteer on the ground, I think just providing knowledge, exactly. and reaching out and providing a little bit of time and giving your knowledge to things like this, that we can definitely reduce the risk of supply and demand, either for next time or even just moving forward. And I think it's amazing what you are doing. So we've only got a couple minutes left, but I do want to get to a couple of questions.
Okay.
So, Martin says, are you using GLEC framework for CO2 emissions, or are you considering that for transportation decisions?
To my knowledge, I'm not using we're not using a GLEC framework. We have some tools that allow us to model. We have a transportation command center, which is using a variety of different software platforms. And again, it's a 24/7 operation that enables us to capture our improvements in emissions. So I'm glad to hear more about GLEC framework.
Okay. And Mike, in your supplier risk assessment, do you collaborate with your critical suppliers to determine whether there are any BCP gaps that could increase your risk?
Yes. And I think COVID has taught us that we need to do more. So yes, we always make sure in any bid that, that there is a BCP. I mean, that's just one of the givens, that they have to have one. It's how good is it? So it's really exploring how good is it? How good is it at, mitigating risks and addressing all of the different kinds of supply chain disruptions that we talked about.
Absolutely. Okay. So Scott says, are there technologies using AI that can help companies be more proactive and anticipate potential disruptions?
Absolutely. And I'm sure we're using them. And I know in the command center we are. And the other plug that I'll make is machine learning. There's a lot of opportunities for machine learning in supply chain. Mm-hmm. So trying to think of a really good example. I know in trade compliance, we're looking at machine learning. For AI, really, we do live modeling of our transportation. We can at any moment, pull up our transportation and look at, different kind of what if scenarios. So those are just a couple of areas.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of the session. Thank you very much for all of your questions, guys. I know there's a couple of more questions here. So you can connect with Claudia on LinkedIn. We can provide that link in Slack if you don't mind, Claudia. Do you mind us doing that? Sure. And then they can send you the rest of the questions directly on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining me in this session today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for having me, and sorry for my internet issues. Yep.
No worries. I mean, these things happen, right? I am truly humbled, because I know you have a lot going on over at Google and volunteering in your community. So I just appreciate you taking the time and sharing the insights with us. Again, if you want to connect with Claudia and ask your questions, make sure to connect with her on LinkedIn. We are going to close this session, go back into Slack, do some networking in the networking lounge or the main lobby. You can visit the specific channels for our sponsors and startups who are having some fun things happening throughout the day. So don't miss out on that. We've got about 15 minutes until the next session. So make the most of the day and go back into your interactive agenda in the main lobby for those one-click easy access buttons to get to your next session. And if you have any questions, we also have a support and feedback channel if you need any help with anything. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.